This is Criminal Interrupted. Today, I'm taking you to the quiet, picturesque countryside of Cambridgeshire, England, specifically to the small, tight-knit market town of Soham. It's a place where everyone knew everyone, where kids walked home from school unaided, and where the greatest worry was often just the weather. It was in this sanctuary, on a warm Sunday evening in August 2002, that a nightmare arrived. Two best friends, 10-year-old Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, had been at a family barbecue. They were inseparable, dressed in matching Manchester United football shirts, laughing as they walked just a few hundred yards down the road towards home, but they never arrived. The ensuing 2-week search became one of the biggest missing person operations in British history, a national obsession fueled by heartbreaking appeals from their families. But as the days turned into weeks, hope turned to dread. And then the focus narrowed. The prime suspect wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a familiar face, a man with access, who offered comfort to the search efforts, and whose life was intimately woven into the fabric of the community. This is the case of the Soham murders. This is a difficult and detailed topic to cover, and your support is what allows me to continue bringing you these in-depth episodes on complex cases. As I've mentioned before, I'm currently focusing on this podcast full-time due to a heart condition, so every follow and review makes a huge difference. Please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Criminal Interrupted on your favourite podcast app. Liking this episode and leaving a review is the best way to help others find me. Thank you for listening and your incredible support. The man responsible for this unimaginable crime was Ian Kevin Huntley, a name that became infamous in the summer of 2002. Born in 1974 in Immingham, just outside of Grimsby, Huntley grew up in a household with starkly contrasting dynamics. He was described as a mummy's boy, close to his mother, who served as his protector and safe space. But he lived in fear of his father, who was a stern disciplinarian. From early on, Huntley learned to act out angrily to get attention, often throwing violent tantrums. As he entered his school years, he showed an average academic ability but failed to connect with his peers, increasingly becoming a loner. This difference, coupled with his physical appearance, made him a target. He was relentlessly bullied, given cruel nicknames like Spacehead and the White Cliff of Dover. The bullying became so intense at his first comprehensive school that his parents felt they had to move him when he was just 13 years old. This consistent, deeply traumatizing persecution from his peers created a cocktail of destructive emotions. He withdrew from relationships as they didn't feel safe. There was a brewing rage and a desire for retribution, and a powerful need to establish power and control so that he would never feel vulnerable again. In a fragile state of adolescence, dealing with years of rejection, Huntley sought comfort in things, specifically developing a deep, lifelong passion for military aircraft. But his inability to form effective relationships, perhaps best highlighted by his decision to set up the Grimsby and Immingham chapter of the Bros fan club, meant the bullying only continued. He was an outsider, perpetually marked as different. By the age of 13, Ian Huntley already had a fascination with planes. That passion grew, and he joined the Air Training Corps with dreams of one day entering the Royal Air Force. On the surface, despite the bullying he endured and his struggles to fit in, Huntley seemed to be moving in a positive direction. He wasn't failing academically, he had ambitions, and his family life, at least outwardly, didn't appear deeply troubled. To those around him, aside from the bullying, his childhood looked relatively secure and happy. But then came a turning point, a moment that would leave a lasting mark. At 13, Huntley walked in on his father in bed with his 16-year-old babysitter. It was a shocking and deeply inappropriate situation for any child to witness. Instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, his father reacted with aggression, threatening Huntley into secrecy. That betrayal forced him into a position no child should ever be in, lying to protect a parent, deceiving his mother, with whom he had a close bond, and carrying the weight of a disturbing secret. This wasn't just about witnessing something traumatic. It was about being coerced into collusion. When a parent demands deception, it reshapes a child's understanding of trust, accountability, and morality. From this point, Huntley's behaviour began to change. Lying became second nature. The boundary between truth and falsehood blurred, and soon his actions reflected that shift. He started to bully others, despite knowing firsthand the pain of being a victim. By 15, Huntley's behaviour had taken a darker turn. On one occasion, he violently choked a younger boy, so severely that the boy believed he might die. Witnesses said Huntley seemed intent on proving himself, almost as if he was trying to emulate the notorious East End gangsters Ronnie and Reggie Kray. The Kray brothers were feared but also celebrated, and Huntley appeared to model himself on their image of power and notoriety. But his aggression didn't stop with people. Disturbingly, Huntley began to direct his cruelty towards animals. Reports suggest he killed a 6-month-old puppy simply because it disobeyed him. He was also known to tie fireworks to cats, deliberately inflicting terror and pain. This kind of behaviour is often recognised as a red flag in psychological research, a precursor to more serious violence. Many individuals who later develop antisocial or psychopathic traits begin by harming animals before moving on to people. For Huntley, these acts weren't accidents or childish mischief. They were deliberate choices to dominate, to control, and to cause suffering. Even as a teenager, Huntley seemed to take a satisfaction in witnessing fear and pain. It was an early glimpse of the malevolence that would later define him. There were also reports that, as a teenager, Huntley may himself have been a victim of abuse. These accounts came from boys who were on the edges of his social circle, friends of convenience, really, who spent time with him largely to avoid becoming targets of his bullying. Some of them recalled that Huntley would meet a man named Vern. Vern was not simply suspected of abuse. He was a convicted sex offender who had served time in prison for raping a young boy. He was known to loiter around public toilets near Huntley's home, an alarming situation in itself. According to these accounts, Huntley would sometimes go into a cubicle with Vern and emerge with money, a £5 note in his hand. For his peers, this behaviour seemed strange and unsettling, and while Huntley was a teenager, legally still a child, he could not consent to such encounters. Vern was a predator, and Huntley was vulnerable. I do want to note that by mentioning these things that happened to Huntley as a young age, I am not excusing his later behaviour or behaviour at the time. Around the same age, Huntley sustained a serious head injury during a fight. He was beaten badly, and while lying on the ground, he was kicked in the head. Despite his bullying, Huntley was not popular. He had few friends, yet as he grew more confident, he began to pursue relationships with girls, almost always younger than himself. At first the age gap was small, a year or two, but it became a recurring pattern. These relationships were not innocent. They reflected a desire to explore sexuality with vulnerable partners. One incident stands out. At 16, Huntley attended the birthday party of a 12-year-old girl. That in itself might not raise alarm. Teenagers often attend family or community events with younger children present. But Huntley gave this 12-year-old girl a gift, a pair of red lingerie knickers. If I was this girl's mother, I would have kicked him in the head. This behaviour underscored a troubling pattern. Huntley was not simply awkward or misguided. He was crossing boundaries in ways that were deeply inappropriate. And all the while, he was still carrying the secret forced upon him years earlier, the secret of his father's betrayal. By his mid-teens, with relationships of his own and growing tension with his father, Huntley seemed less able to contain that secret. The fractures in his family ties were becoming more visible. Huntley could no longer keep the secret of his father's betrayal. He told his mother, and the revelation devastated her. She left her husband, taking Huntley and his brother Wayne with her. His father's reaction was furious. He felt betrayed, turned to heavy drinking, and became violent towards Huntley. Instead of accepting responsibility, he projected blame onto his son. Even when Huntley told the truth, he was punished for it. The marriage officially ended in 1993, and soon after, Huntley's mother entered a relationship with another woman. For Huntley and Wayne, this was a major shift in their family dynamic. Meanwhile, their father moved to East Anglia with a new partner, leaving the boys behind. After leaving school, Huntley did not pursue a career path. Despite early ambitions of joining the forces, he drifted through a series of short-term jobs: security guard, fish factory worker, door-to-door salesman. He rarely held positions for long, and colleagues across different workplaces described him as unsettling to be around. Female staff in particular recalled his verbal abuse, with Huntley targeting their looks and weight. Alongside this bullying, Huntley lived in a fantasy world. He lied constantly, claiming to have been an RAF pilot or to have held management posts. In reality, he was stuck in menial work, but he wanted others to believe he was more important than he was. By 18, Huntley's mental health was deteriorating. He suffered from depression, likely triggered by the resentment of his parents' split, his father's drinking, and the upheaval of his family's life. At 18, he attempted suicide, and again twice more at the age of 20. Despite the bullying and other negative experiences, Huntley soon entered an intense, fast-moving relationship with 17-year-old Claire Evans in Grimsby. They met through his employment at a local Heinz factory. Within 2 months he proposed, and they married quickly. There were signs of dysfunction from the start. Claire didn't tell her family she was even dating, let alone marrying someone. The relationship soon became violent. She was just 17 years old when they met, and Huntley's control and aggression surfaced early. Within a month, Huntley began sexually assaulting Claire and humiliated her by locking her inside the home or cutting off all her hair. One assault was so severe that Claire miscarried. Not long after, Claire intended to leave Huntley. In an attempt to emotionally blackmail Claire into staying, Huntley faked illnesses, even going so far to fake a seizure. Claire eventually left and began a relationship with Huntley's younger brother, Wayne. For Huntley, it was another profound betrayal. First his father, now his brother. He refused to grant Claire a divorce for years, trying to block their relationship. Around this time, Huntley began appearing on the authorities' radar. A clear pattern emerged, a persistent attraction to underage girls. At 21, he was still pursuing young teenagers. One of them, 15-year-old Katie Weber, later had his child. Katie described their relationship as highly abusive. Early on, Huntley manipulated her into moving in, just months after they met. Her parents called the police. A 21-year-old with a 15-year-old is illegal, but Huntley deflected concern by claiming the relationship was platonic. He assaulted her and raped her repeatedly, including during early pregnancy, showing no regard for her boundaries or their unborn child. On one occasion, after he raped her, he punched her and kicked her down the stairs while she was 3 months pregnant. Recognizing the danger and the responsibility now for her baby, she left before her daughter, Samantha, was born. This was a man already showing himself to be dangerous, and yet somehow he managed to secure a job as a college caretaker, a role that gave him direct access to the very group he had an unhealthy attraction towards. Huntley's behaviour was alarming long before he became a caretaker. In Grimsby, His reputation was so notorious that in 1999, locals attacked his flat, smashing windows and breaking down his door. They believed he was a pedophile. They didn't need police or social services to tell them. They saw enough for themselves to want him gone from their community. And yet, despite this, Huntley would later be employed at Soham Community College, close to the home of the two 10-year-old girls. By then, he was 21, and authorities had a troubling amount of information on him. And now I'm going to go into Ian Huntley's offences before the murders. In March 1996, Huntley was charged with burglary. Alongside an accomplice, he allegedly broke into the home of a neighbour in Grimsby, stealing electrical goods, jewellery and cash. The case went to court, but the prosecution offered no evidence, so the judge ordered the offence to lie on file. Between August 1995 and May 1996, Huntley pursued multiple sexual relationships with teenage girls, all of whom were below the legal age of consent. 3 of these girls were 15 years old, and one was just 13 years old. One of the 15-year-olds became pregnant, later giving birth to a baby girl in 1998. Although police received 3 separate reports about these relationships, Huntley was never charged. Each of the girls denied having sex with him, refused to make formal complaints, and declined help from social services. Rumours about Huntley's interest in underage girls quickly spread through the community, and he became the subject of insults from neighbours and colleagues. As a result, he began avoiding socialising with co-workers, fearing he might be attacked if left alone with them. In April 1998, Huntley was arrested on suspicion of raping an 18-year-old girl. He admitted having sex with her, but insisted it was consensual, and no charges were brought. Just a month later, another 18-year-old girl from Grimsby accused Huntley of beating and raping her while she walked home from a nightclub. She claimed he had threatened to kill her before the assault. Huntley admitted sex had taken place, but again maintained it was consensual. He was charged and remanded in custody at HM Prison Wolds for 1 week. However, the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the case after reviewing CCTV footage from the nightclub, which showed Huntley and the complainant socialising together. With insufficient evidence to secure a conviction, the charge was dismissed, which is insane. This allegation intensified rumours about Huntley's sexual violence. He was fired from his job, forced to move back into his mother's home, and banned from contacting his baby daughter or her mother. In July 1998, police were informed that Huntley had sexually assaulted an 11-year-old girl in Cleethorpes the previous September. The child said he had threatened to kill her if she told her mother. Huntley was never charged, but years later, in April 2007, he confessed to this attack. The final allegation before the Soham murders came in July 1999, when a woman reported being raped. By this point, police already suspected Huntley of being a serial sex offender. He was interviewed and provided a DNA sample, while his partner, Maxine Carr, which I'll go into later, gave him an alibi. Ultimately, the victim stated that Huntley was not her attacker. Unlike the earlier cases, she had never identified him as the perpetrator. By 2001, Huntley's proven and alleged offences had been reported to Humberside Police on 10 separate occasions and to social services on 5 occasions. What's especially tragic about these early offences is that so many of Huntley's victims never saw justice. Time and again, young girls reported him or rumours spread through their community, but their voices weren't taken seriously. Police investigations stalled, charges were dropped, and social services were unable to intervene because the girls were too frightened or unwilling to make a formal complaint. The result was devastating. Huntley's behaviour became an open secret, whispered about in Grimsby and Cleethorpes, yet he remained free. Each missed opportunity to hold him accountable meant he was able to continue living without consequence, moving from one allegation to the next. These failures didn't just silence vulnerable victims, they allowed Huntley to stay in the community, setting the stage for the horrific crimes he would later commit in Soham. By February 1999, Ian Huntley was 25 years old. It was around this time that he met 22-year-old Maxine Carr at a nightclub in Grimsby. Carr was immediately drawn to him. She described being attracted to his confidence. Though others might have seen it as arrogance, Carr was immediately attracted to him. Carr was older than the teenage girls Huntley had previously pursued, but she looked young for her age and carried a certain naivety. Those who knew her often remarked that she lacked emotional maturity. To understand her role in this story, it's important to look at her background, though not to excuse any of the behaviours she later committed. Maxine Carr was born Maxine Capp on February 16, 1977, to Alfred and Shirley Capp. She had one sister, Hayley, who was 10 years older. Carr's father was absent from her life after her parents split in 1979, and she was largely raised by her mother and grandparents. Seeking to distance herself from her father, she changed her surname to Carr. Her upbringing was marked by financial struggles, but she was loved and cared for. Still, Carr faced difficulties at school. She was bullied about her weight, which left deep emotional scars. She developed bulimia, engaged in self-harm, and later suffered from anorexia. These eating disorders remained a significant part of her life, even up to her eventual conviction. Alongside this, Carr struggled with obsessive-compulsive disorder, particularly compulsive cleaning. These mental health challenges consumed her energy and focus, leaving little room for academic achievement. She left school without qualifications, vulnerable and impressionable. Despite these challenges, Carr attended Grimsby Institute and obtained a diploma in general care in 1996. People who knew her often described her as having two sides, a Jekyll and Hyde personality. Normally shy and introverted, she transformed when drinking alcohol. Under its influence, she became confident, exhibitionist, and promiscuous, known for one-night stands. This behavior suggested she sought validation through sexual relationships, a temporary coping mechanism for her deeper insecurities. When Carr met Huntley, the relationship followed a familiar pattern. Huntley moved quickly, displaying impulsive behavior typical of antisocial personality disorder. Within a month, they'd moved into a flat together in Barton-on-Humber. From the outside, they looked like a normal couple, similar in age, both working modest jobs. Huntley as a barman, Carr packing fish. But beneath the surface, Carr was living with a man who had a long history of predatory behavior. Initially, Huntley presented himself as caring and charming. This superficial charm is another hallmark of manipulative personalities. But it didn't last. Soon, his true nature emerged. He became violent and controlling. The couple argued constantly, and Huntley physically assaulted Carr, including grabbing her by the throat. Their relationship was domestically abusive, echoing Huntley's earlier treatment of women. Around this time, Huntley began reconnecting with his father, despite their fractured past. His father worked as a caretaker in Cambridgeshire, and Huntley occasionally helped him. This experience seemed to appeal to Huntley, and in 2001, he applied for a caretaker position at Soham Village College. The vacancy itself was a result of a scandal. The previous caretaker had been dismissed for having inappropriate relationships with students, a glaring safeguarding issue. After this issue, one would expect that the school would be especially vigilant in hiring a replacement. Yet despite Huntley's extensive history of allegations, he was given the job. Huntley did apply under a different surname, but also listed Huntley on the form when asked if he had used other names. Proper procedures should have flagged his background, but they weren't followed. This was a catastrophic safeguarding failure, and in November 2001, Huntley and Carr moved to Soham. By the spring term of 2002, Carr had taken up a voluntary role as a classroom assistant at St Andrew's Primary School in Soham. She lied about her qualifications to secure the position, demonstrating her own willingness to deceive. Carr had long dreamed of being a teacher, but she lacked the academic ability and emotional maturity for the role. Still, she was placed in a position of trust with children. It was here that Carr met 10-year-old Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. They were best friends, inseparable, and in Year 5 at St. Andrews. Carr was their teaching assistant. The girls loved her, describing her as kind and compassionate. She encouraged them to call her Maxine rather than Miss Carr, and they grew quickly attached to her. When Carr failed to secure a permanent job at the school, Holly and Jessica were upset. Holly even drew Carr a card with a smiling face, writing, quote, "I'll miss you a lot. Thank you, see ya, miss ya, love Holly," end quote. The tragic irony of that gesture is haunting. Holly's innocent kindness towards Carr would later be entwined with the darkest chapter of her short life. On Saturday, August 3rd, 2002, Carr spent the day in Grimsby with her mother, visiting pubs and drinking. Alcohol often transformed her demeanour, and that night she was seen kissing and cuddling a 17-year-old rugby player, a boy 8 years younger than her, towering at 6'5" compared to Carr's 5'2". There were suspicions that Carr was involved in a secret relationship with him. Huntley, known for his jealousy and controlling nature, believed she was cheating. Given his history of violence and paranoia, this belief would have added tension to their already volatile relationship. Carr's behaviour that weekend highlighted her immaturity and instability. Huntley, meanwhile, was a man with a long record of predatory behaviour, now embedded in a community, working at a school, and living with a woman who had direct access to children. Together, they formed a dangerous combination. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, two bright, loving 10-year-old girls, had crossed paths with Maxine Carr and through her with Ian Huntley. Within days, their lives would be tragically cut short, and their world would come to know their names. Holly Marie Wells was born on October 4, 1991, the daughter of Kevin and Nicola Wells. She was bubbly and outgoing, described by her teachers as full of life. Holly loved singing and dancing, performing with the Fenland Majorettes, and she played the cornet. She was creative, expressive, and always ready to throw herself into new activities. Her warmth and kindness made her a beloved presence at St. Andrews Primary School, where she was a Year 5 pupil. Jessica Amy Chapman was born just weeks earlier, on September 1st, 1991, to Sharon and Leslie Chapman. Jessica was more of a tomboy, cheeky, inquisitive, and adventurous. She had a beautiful smile and a go-get-'em spirit. She enjoyed swimming and played football for the Soham Town Rangers under-11s. Jessica's energy and enthusiasm made her popular among her peers, and she was known for a lively, determined nature. Together, Holly and Jessica were inseparable. They had been best friends since the age of 4, and their bond was obvious to everyone around them. Their head teacher, George Fisher, described them as, quote, "adorable, happy, generous, and giving," end quote. Holly's bubbly personality and Jessica's tomboyish charm complemented each other perfectly. They were more like sisters than friends, sharing laughter, secrets, and the simple joys of childhood. On Sunday, August 4, 2002, the girls spent the day together at Holly's home. Jessica had recently returned from a holiday and brought back a gift for her best friend, a necklace engraved with the letter H. It was the kind of gesture we all remember from childhood, the excitement of sharing something special with the person who means the most to you. That afternoon, Holly, Jessica, and another friend played video games, enjoying what seemed like a completely ordinary Sunday. Later that day, Holly and Jessica changed into matching Manchester United football shirts. Just putting it out there that I'm an MU fan, so these girls are my kindred spirits. Both girls were devoted fans of the team and idolised David Beckham. Jessica borrowed a shirt belonging to Holly's older brother so that they could both wear Beckham's famous number 7. Dressed alike, they looked like twins, smiling, carefree, and full of excitement. Holly's mother captured the moment in a photograph. The image would later become iconic during the search for the missing girls. In that picture, they are simply happy children, their futures unwritten, their lives full of promise. And this is where the sadness cuts deepest, because I know what it's like to grow up in a small neighborhood, to have a best friend when you're young. That innocence, that joy, that trust in people around you, it feels unshakable. You believe your neighbors are safe, that your community will protect you, that tomorrow will always come. Holly and Jessica lived in that same innocence, trusting in a world around them, believing they were safe in their town. After finishing their tea, Holly and Jessica went upstairs around 6:10 p.m. Just a few minutes later, at about 6:15 p.m., they slipped out of the house without telling any of the adults. Their plan was simple and innocent: to buy sweets from the vending machine at a local sports centre. It was only a short walk from Holly's home, and in their minds it was safe. Perhaps they didn't mention it because they knew they'd be told no just after eating, or perhaps because in a small town like Soham, children felt secure enough to wander for a few minutes without worry. CCTV captured the girls in their matching MU shirts as they passed the sports centre just before 6:30 p.m. A witness saw them inside a few minutes later, and then again walking arm in arm along College Road. That image, two best friends linking together, carefree and connected, is heartbreaking. They had no idea of the danger ahead. From this point, the details become less certain. What is believed is that as they walked on home, they passed the house of 29-year-old Ian Huntley. Huntley struck up a conversation with them. Holly and Jessica knew the dangers of talking to strangers, but Huntley wasn't a stranger in their eyes. They adored Maxine Carr, his partner. And when someone you trust is close to another adult, you naturally extend that trust. Maxine liked him, so how dangerous could he be? Children often see adults as safe, especially those connected to schools. Huntley used that trust. It's believed that he lied, telling the girls that Maxine was inside and invited them in. Police later suggested Huntley had just argued with Carr over suspicions of infidelity. He was in a jealous rage, alone in the house, and already known for his predatory behaviour toward young girls. Carr herself would later say Huntley was sexually frustrated at the time. Combined with his history, the assumption is clear. His motivation for luring the girls inside was deviant. What we know for certain is devastating. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman never left Huntley's house alive. Jessica's phone disconnected at 6:46 p.m., and investigators believe this was the time the girls were murdered. At 8 p.m., Holly's mother, Nicola, went to her daughter's room to ask her and Jessica to say goodbye to departing house guests. She discovered that they were missing. Alarmed immediately, she alerted her husband, and together they searched the house and nearby streets. Thinking Holly might have gone to Jessica's, Nicola phoned her parents, Leslie and Sharon Chapman, but Jessica hadn't returned home either, and her family was already worried. By 9:55 p.m., the police were informed. A massive search began. This was completely out of character for both girls, and officers feared abduction. Within hours, 400 police officers were involved, conducting house-to-house inquiries and combing the area. Volunteers from the nearby US Air Force Base joined local residents, determined to bring the girls home. Posters went up everywhere, showing the photograph taken that very afternoon, Holly and Jessica smiling in their football shirts, moments before their disappearance. Those first 12 hours are critical. Statistically, the longer a child is missing, the less likely a safe return becomes. The families, the community, and the police all knew the urgency. The fear was palpable. 2 beloved children had vanished from a quiet, leafy town, and everyone felt the weight of it. Investigators immediately considered abduction. They checked known sex offenders in the area, 260 across Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire, with 15 classed as high risk. They explored the possibility of online contact through chat rooms. Every line of inquiry was pursued. Yet what makes this story even more chilling is that among the searchers, blending in with concerned locals, was Ian Huntley himself, the man responsible for the girls' disappearance. From the very beginning, Ian Huntley stood out to investigators. Officers noted how unusually keen he was to assist them, almost too eager to place himself at the centre of events. He even admitted that he had spoken to Holly and Jessica, suggesting he might have been the last person to see them before they vanished. Huntley told police that he had been outside washing his dog when the girls approached, asking about his girlfriend, their teaching assistant, Maxine Carr. They wanted to know if she had been successful in a recent job application. Huntley claimed he had told them no, and that one of the girls replied, quote, "Tell her we are sorry," end quote, before walking off in the direction of the local library. Now, why would he do this? There are several possible reasons. First, by inserting himself into the investigation, Huntley may have been trying to deflect suspicion. If he appeared cooperative and helpful, he could position himself as a concerned member of the community rather than a suspect. Second, it gave him a chance to control the narrative. By shaping what people thought the girls' last movements were, he could mislead investigators and buy himself time. And third, there's a disturbing possibility that Huntley wanted to be close to the drama, feeding off the attention and the sense of power that came from knowing he was hiding the truth in plain sight. In hindsight, his behaviour fits a pattern seen in other offenders who involve themselves in searches or vigils. It's a tactic designed to mask guilt, but it can also reveal arrogance, the belief that they can outsmart both the police and the public. Police quickly grew suspicious of his account and his behaviour. At one point, he asked a female officer how long DNA evidence could survive, then made a grotesque joke about killing her. That same officer later described Huntley's eyes as unsettling, staring at you, but also through you, as if you weren't really there. His behaviour, his words, and his manner all raised red flags. As the last known person to have seen the girls, officers decided to search his home on August 5th, just one day after their disappearance. On the surface, nothing incriminating was found, but there were details that stood out. Clothing hung on the washing line despite heavy rain. The house appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned, with freshly washed bedsheets, and Maxine Carr would later remark that this was the first time Huntley had ever done a domestic chore. The dining room carpet was also soaking wet. Huntley explained it away, claiming that there had been a flood. He appeared agitated, and officers noticed 3 vertical scratches on his left jaw, each around 3 centimetres long. Huntley insisted his dog had caused them, but to anyone looking closely, the marks suggested a struggle. Despite these suspicious signs, forensic teams were not immediately called in. Instead, Huntley broke down in front of the officer, insisting he was being fitted up, wrongly suspected of a crime. Yet everything about him, his behaviour, his story, his injuries, carried the hallmarks of guilt. On August 6, 2002, Ian Huntley drove to Grimsby to collect Maxine Carr, who had been staying with her parents. A neighbour of Carr's mother, Marion Clift, noticed something unsettling. She saw Huntley and Carr standing at the boot of Huntley's car. Carr was crying, Huntley looked deathly pale, and when he realised Clift was watching, he quickly slammed the boot shut. The moment was strange, emotional, and deeply suspicious. Back in Soham, police visited the couple again to corroborate alibis. Officers asked Carr if Holly and Jessica had been taught about stranger danger at school. She confirmed they had. When asked how the girls might react if told to get into a car with a stranger, Huntley, who had no real relationship with them, interrupted to answer. He said Holly would probably get in quietly, but Jessica would fight and get angry. That comment chilled investigators. It seemed to reveal knowledge of the girl's personality that he should not have had. and it raised the disturbing possibility that he was describing exactly how events had unfolded. Later, in press interviews, Huntley insisted he barely knew the girls, yet his earlier statement implied otherwise. He repeated his account, that he had been outside grooming his dog when Holly and Jessica approached, asking about Miss Carr. He claimed that he had told them she hadn't got the job she wanted, and that they walked off toward the library. He even added irrelevant details, saying he was surprised they asked about Carr instead of the dog. For investigators, this was classic behavior of someone trying to pad out a story with unnecessary information to make it sound more believable. As the investigation entered its second week, Huntley's appearance began to change. He was visibly losing weight and showing signs of insomnia, far from the behavior of an innocent man. These were the signs of someone under immense pressure, anxious that the net was closing in. Between August 10th and 14th, Huntley placed himself firmly in the public eye, giving multiple television interviews. While many locals refused to speak to the media, Huntley seemed eager. Carr also appeared in interviews. Holding a card Holly had made for her at the end of term, she spoke about the girls in past tense. She described Holly as really lovely and said she would keep the card for the rest of her life. For some, this seemed suspicious. Did Carr already know that the girls were dead? If so, her behavior, speaking fondly of them while appealing for their safe return, was chillingly cold and calculated. Together, Huntley and Carr placed themselves at the center of the media storm. They gave interviews, made appeals, and presented themselves as concerned and cooperative. But behind the scenes, police were watching closely, scrutinizing every word and every action. The families, the community, and the nation were desperate for answers. And while the search continued, the spotlight increasingly fell on these two individuals, whose connection to Holly and Jessica was tenuous, yet whose behavior was impossible to ignore. On August 17th, 2002, the search for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman came to its devastating conclusion. Their bodies were discovered near RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, about 12 miles from Soham. The discovery shattered the last fragile hope that the girls might still be alive. The grief was overwhelming. Thousands of floral tributes were laid in Soham and at the site where the girls were found. Across the country, communities mourned. At the Chelsea Flower Show, a new rose was unveiled, called the Soham Rose, created in their memory. It became a symbol of the nation's sorrow and solidarity. Manchester United expressed condolences and paid tribute to Holly and Jessica. The club recognised how much the girls loved MU, noting that they had been wearing replica shirts when last seen. For the families, the discovery ended the agonising uncertainty. For the police, it confirmed what they had already suspected. This was a double murder. Suspicion continued to focus on Ian Huntley, but Maxine Carr had provided him with an alibi, claiming she was at home with him on the day the girls disappeared. She repeated this story in press interviews, even saying she had been inside the house when Huntley spoke to Holly and Jessica on the doorstep. She told reporters, quote, "I only wish we'd asked them where they were going," end quote. Both Huntley and Carr appeared disturbingly at ease lying to the media. Huntley even smiled during interviews, a chilling echo of what criminologists called duper's delight, the smug satisfaction of someone who believes they've fooled everyone. On August 16th, 12 days after the girls disappeared, Huntley and Carr were questioned for 7 hours. Afterwards, they were placed in separate safe houses. Police wanted to prevent them from coordinating their stories, and there was also a real risk of vigilante violence. People who had known Huntley in Grimsby recognised him from television and contacted police, convinced he was responsible. During questioning, Huntley's behaviour was telling. At one point, he sat with his head in his hands, motionless for nearly 40 seconds, before quietly saying, quote, "To think that I might have been the last friendly face those two girls had to speak to before something happened to them," end quote. The words were chilling. Huntley was indeed the last face they saw, but there was nothing friendly about him. As the investigation continued, Carr's alibi began to unravel. Phone records proved she had not been in Soham at all. She was in Grimsby, seen kissing a 17-year-old rugby player. Her lie was exposed. Police then carried out a thorough search of Huntley's home. They found a recently cracked bath, suggesting violence may have occurred there. Attention then turned to the college grounds where Huntley worked as a caretaker. In a bin inside a hangar, officers discovered Holly and Jessica's MU shirts, along with underwear and other clothing. Attempts had been made to burn them, but they were not fully destroyed. Huntley denied ever entering the hangar, but police found a key in a cabinet beside his bed. His lies were collapsing. Forensic analysis confirmed the truth. Fibers from the girls' shirts matched samples taken from Huntley's clothing and home. His hair was found on their clothing. Fibers from his carpet were present, and his fingerprints were on the bin where the items were discovered. Jessica's mobile phone signal was traced to the area near Huntley's house, and the evidence was overwhelming. On August 16th, police searched Huntley's car. It had been deep cleaned. The rear seat cover was missing, the boot lining had been replaced with indoor carpet, and beneath the vehicle, investigators found traces of chalk, brick dust, and concrete. Huntley had even changed all 4 tyres the day after the murders, despite them being in good condition, and paid the fitter £10 to falsify the registration on the invoice. The fitter later told police exactly what Huntley had asked him to do. Piece by piece, the evidence mounted. By the 20th of August, investigators had established sufficient physical evidence from Huntley's home, vehicle, and Soham Village College to charge him with 2 counts of murder. Carr was also charged with attempting to prevent the course of justice on the same date. She was further charged with 2 counts of assisting an offender on 17th of January 2003. While on remand at Holloway Prison, Carr regularly inquired as to Huntley's welfare and wrote several letters in which she professed her continued love for him. Carr only severed contact with Huntley in December 2002. To assess Huntley's mental health, he was held for nearly 2 months under Section 48 of the Mental Health Act at Rampton Secure Hospital. During this time, consultant forensic psychiatrist Christopher Clark examined him to determine whether Huntley suffered from any mental illness and if he was fit to stand trial. In October, Clark concluded that while Huntley displayed psychopathic traits, he did not have a major mental or psychotic disorder. On October 8th, Huntley was officially declared mentally competent to face trial. With that decision, the path was clear. If found guilty, he would face life imprisonment. Huntley was moved to a segregation unit at Wood Hill Prison in Milton Keynes. On June 9, 2003, he attempted suicide by swallowing 29 antidepressants he had stockpiled in his cell. Staff feared the overdose might be fatal, but within 48 hours he was returned to his cell. He was later transferred to Belmarsh Prison in London. At a preliminary hearing at the Old Bailey on June 16, 2003, Huntley pleaded not guilty to the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, but admitted guilt to conspiracy to prevent the course of justice. His partner, Maxine Carr, pleaded not guilty to charges of attempting to prevent the course of justice and assisting an offender. The trial of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr began at the Old Bailey on November 5, 2003. One of the key witnesses was a pathologist who had examined the remains of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The court heard that the bodies were badly decomposed, partly skeletonized, and had been burned. Because of this, many major organs were destroyed, making it impossible to determine the precise cause of death or to establish whether a sexual assault had taken place. When Huntley gave evidence, he admitted for the first time that Holly and Jessica had died inside his home. He claimed their deaths were accidental. Huntley told the court that Holly had suffered a nosebleed and that he invited the girls inside. He said Holly fell into a half-filled bath and drowned after he slipped while reaching for toilet paper. He then claimed Jessica became hysterical, and in an attempt to quiet her, he accidentally smothered her. Huntley further admitted that after their deaths, he placed the bodies in his car, drove them to a site near RAF Lakenheath, removed their clothing, and attempted to destroy evidence by burning the bodies with petrol. His account changed over time. Initially, he told police he only spoke to the girls outside his home. Later, when forensic evidence linked them to his house, he altered his story to include their presence inside and introduced the claim of accidental deaths. The court also heard recordings made while Huntley was in prison awaiting trial. In one, he said that if Jessica had not kept shouting, she might have left the house alive. He admitted he stopped her from leaving because he feared she would tell others what had happened. The pathologist's evidence contradicted Huntley's version of events. They confirmed Holly had not drowned. There was no water found in her lungs, and there was no trace of blood on her clothing consistent with a nosebleed. Instead, the findings suggested both girls died from asphyxiation. There were no compression marks on their neck, leading experts to conclude they were likely suffocated, possibly with a hand or pillow. The prosecution alleged that Huntley deliberately lured the girls into his home and killed them shortly afterwards. They argued the murders may not have been pre-planned, but Huntley's actions afterwards, transporting the bodies, attempting to burn them, and destroying clothing, showed a clear effort to conceal the crime. His past behavior with young girls was presented as evidence that he had rehearsed predatory actions before. Within 12 hours of the killings, Huntley had moved the bodies to a remote location, believing that they would not be found. His treatment of the remains was seen as a deliberate attempt to eliminate forensic evidence. Maxine Carr, meanwhile, maintained that she had no knowledge of the murders. She admitted helping Huntley clean the house in the days afterwards, but claimed this was due to obsessive cleaning habits linked to OCD, not an attempt to cover up a crime. She insisted she believed the girls were still alive at the time. Ultimately, the prosecution highlighted the inconsistencies in both Huntley's and Carr's accounts. Their stories were repeatedly contradicted by forensic evidence and witness testimony, leaving the jury with little doubt about Huntley's guilt and Carr's role in providing him with a false alibi. After a 5-week trial at the Old Bailey, the jury, made up of 5 men and 7 women, deliberated for 4 days. On December 17, 2003, they returned their verdicts. Ian Huntley was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. Maxine Carr was acquitted of assisting an offender, with the jury accepting her claim that she had lied to protect Huntley and that, prior to his arrest, she genuinely believed he was innocent. In later years, Huntley alleged that Carr knew more than she admitted, even claiming she had suggested disposing of the bodies. However, Huntley was a proven pathological liar, and many believe these claims were motivated by resentment that Carr was able to rebuild her life after the trial. Carr was convicted of conspiring to prevent the cause of justice and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Huntley received a life sentence with a minimum term of 40 years, meaning he will not be eligible for parole until 2042, when he will be 68 years old. Mr. Justice Moses, in passing sentence, highlighted the aggravating features of the case, the vulnerability of the victims, their trust in Huntley because of his position as a school caretaker and his relationship with Carr, and his deliberate concealment and destruction of evidence. The judge noted Huntley's lack of remorse, stating that his actions after the murders, pretending concern while hiding the truth, demonstrated his guilt. Huntley avoided a full life term only because prosecutors could not prove a sexual motive beyond reasonable doubt, though the judge acknowledged it was highly likely. He emphasized that the order offered little or no hope of Huntley's eventual release. Jessica Chapman's father, Leslie, described Huntley as, quote, a time bomb waiting to go off, end quote, saying both girls had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. On April 3, 2004, Huntley's rented house, the property where the murders took place, was demolished. The community did not want a house of horrors to remain as a reminder of the crime. It was a symbolic and respectful act, removing a painful landmark of Soham. Following Huntley's conviction, his past was made public. It revealed a long catalogue of complaints and allegations of sexual offences against underage girls and young women. Despite this history, Huntley had still managed to secure employment as a school caretaker, placing him in daily contact with female students who matched his predatory profile. The exposure of these failures led to widespread outrage and calls for reform in safeguarding and vetting procedures across the UK. The murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman triggered a major public inquiry into how Ian Huntley was ever able to secure a job as a school caretaker despite his history of allegations. This became known as the Bishard Inquiry, led by Sir Michael Bishard. Its purpose was to examine intelligence-based record keeping and the vetting process for people working with children and vulnerable individuals. The inquiry exposed serious failings. It led to a tightening of procedures within the Criminal Records Bureau, introducing compulsory background checks for anyone applying to work with children or vulnerable people. Sir Michael Bishard even ordered the suspension of David Westwood, the Chief Constable of Humberside Police, after it was revealed he had authorised the destruction of records relating to alleged child molesters who had not been convicted. Although that suspension was later overturned, the decision had already resulted in the loss of valuable intelligence about potential offenders. Cambridgeshire Constabulary also came under heavy criticism. Chief Constable Tom Lloyd's force had failed to contact Humberside Police when conducting Huntley's background check for his caretaker application at Soham Village College. They did not follow standard vetting guidelines. Had they done so, Huntley would have never been offered the job. The inquiry concluded that both forces had failed in their duty to maintain and share criminal intelligence records. It recommended a clear code of practice for record keeping across police forces. This led to the creation of the Police National Database, designed to close gaps in information sharing and ensure that intelligence about individuals could be accessed nationwide. The inquiry also revealed that Huntley had applied for the caretaker's job under the name Ian Nixon, his mother's maiden name. On the application, however, he admitted he had previously been known as Ian Huntley. Cambridgeshire Police failed to run checks under that name. If they had, Huntley's 1995 burglary charge would have been flagged. His employers later confirmed that had they known about the burglary, they would not have hired him. As a caretaker responsible for school property, a conviction for burglary would have made him unsuitable for the role. But the checks were not carried out properly. Huntley was hired and Holly and Jessica were murdered. The inquiry made clear that these were contributory factors, failures that could and should have been avoided. Maxine Carr was required to serve only half of her sentence. At the time of sentencing, she had already spent 16 months on remand, which was taken into account. She also received a further 135-day reduction because she was classified as a non-dangerous offender. In total, Carr served 21 months in prison before being released in May 2004 on electronic tag. Her conviction was for providing Ian Huntley with a false alibi after he murdered Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, two girls she had taught as a classroom assistant. While Carr did not kill the girls herself, her actions had a significant impact. By lying to protect Huntley, she delayed the investigation and crucial forensic evidence was lost. This left the families without answers to some of the most painful questions about what had happened to their daughters. In February 2005, Carr won an injunction granting her lifelong anonymity. She argued that her life would be in danger if her identity were known to the public. As a result, she was given a new identity and police protection. It was reported that, in 2014, Carr became a mother. Her child will never know her true name or her role in the Soham case. The anonymity order was designed to protect the interests of her child, who bears no responsibility for Carr's past. Carr's anonymity places her among a very small group of former UK prisoners granted secret identities. Others include Mary Bell, convicted of killing 2 children in 1968, and Robert Thompson and John Venables, convicted of the murder of James Bolger in 1993. Life in prison has not been easy for Ian Huntley. As a convicted child murderer, he has been at constant risk of attack from other inmates, and his health has been poor. He's attempted suicide more than once, and while such acts are tragic in any context, Huntley has received little sympathy from fellow prisoners or the wider public, or myself. In 2005, while held at HMP Wakefield, Huntley was attacked by spree killer Mark Hobson, who threw scalding water on him. Huntley was not permanently scarred, but he later sought compensation, applying for £15,000. He was awarded legal aid to pursue the claim, though ultimately he received no such payout. In 2006, Huntley obtained antidepressant medication from other inmates and recorded a cassette tape containing an alleged confession. On the tape, he admitted to the killings but claimed Maxine Carr had discouraged him from telling police and had urged him to burn the bodies. The recording was discovered when his cell was searched. However, Huntley's credibility was widely questioned, as he appeared to minimize his own actions and exaggerate Carr's involvement. In April 2007, Huntley confessed to sexually assaulting an 11-year-old girl in 1997, a case that had been previously dropped by homicide police due to insufficient evidence. The victim, Hayley Giblin, later spoke publicly about how the failure to act had blighted her life and allowed Huntley to remain free, ultimately leading to the deaths of Holly and Jessica. Huntley was transferred to HMP Franklin in 2008. 2 years later, in 2010, he was attacked by inmate Damien Firkins, who slashed Huntley's neck with a makeshift weapon. Huntley required 21 stitches. Firkins later admitted he had planned the attack for weeks and was sentenced to an additional 20 years for attempted murder. Huntley has repeatedly attempted to sue prison authorities, claiming inadequate protection. At one point, he sought £20,000 in compensation, though his applications for legal aid were denied. By contrast, Holly and Jessica's parents received just £11,000 each in compensation through the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, a sum widely criticised as inadequate given the scale of their loss. Inside prison, Huntley has remained unpopular. Former inmates have described him as a loner who rarely joins group activities, often keeping to himself near the kitchens. He has been mocked for his weight and demeanour, and even notorious prisoners such as Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, openly insulted him, calling him a, quote, child-killing bastard, end quote. Accounts suggest Huntley's behaviour varies, sometimes withdrawn and quiet, other times cocky and provocative. Observers have noted that he can appear unpredictable, shifting between confidence and isolation. Whatever the cause, his reputation among fellow inmates is clear. Huntley is regarded with contempt, even by those convicted of serious crimes themselves. In 2012, 10 years after the murders, Huntley's parents, Kevin and Nicola Wells, paid tribute to their daughter. Kevin described Holly as, quote, a star, our daughter, end quote, recalling how she would go to bed with a dictionary so she could look up words while he read Harry Potter to her. He spoke of the pain of losing her, saying, quote, losing Holly was excruciating, but I have yet to see anything to persuade me that the mother's loss, Nicola's, is not the greatest, end quote. The Wells family were given a small enamel box by forensic officers bearing Holly's name. Inside was a lock of her blonde hair salvaged from her burnt body, a gesture both heartbreaking and profoundly respectful. Jessica's parents have spoken far less publicly, choosing privacy in their grief. Both approaches, whether speaking out or remaining silent, reflect different ways families cope with unimaginable loss. In 2018, Huntley's confession tapes were leaked to the media. On them, he claimed Holly's death was accidental, admitting only to Jessica's murder. He described himself as guilty of Holly's manslaughter and Jessica's murder, but continued to deny both killings outright. He insisted he felt remorse, saying he would never apply for parole and expected to die in prison. Yet his account was widely dismissed, seen as another attempt to minimize his actions and avoid full responsibility. Today, Huntley is over halfway through his 40-year minimum term. He remains in prison and has offered no further revelations about Holly and Jessica's deaths. Carr continues to live under a new identity. The Soham murders were not only a devastating crime, but also a turning point for the United Kingdom. The case exposed catastrophic failures in police record keeping and vetting procedures. Yet, despite these reforms, the sense of injustice remains. Ian Huntley sits in prison, over halfway through a 40-year minimum term, still offering shifting confessions that minimize his actions. Maxine Carr, released in 2004, lives under lifelong anonymity, able to build a new life while Holly and Jessica's families live with unanswered questions. For many, this imbalance feels profoundly unfair. 2 little girls lost their futures. Their parents lost their daughters, and yet those responsible were able to move forward in ways the families never can. What endures most is the memory of Holly and Jessica. Holly, described by her father as a star, a child who went to bed with a dictionary so she could understand every word of Harry Potter. Jessica, remembered as lively, cheeky, and full of energy, a girl who loved football and swimming. Their friendship was pure, their bond unbreakable, and their lives were filled with promise. Over 20 years on, the Soham murders remain etched into the national consciousness. They remind us of the fragility of innocence, the importance of safeguarding, and the enduring grief of families who lost everything. Above all, they remind us of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 2 best friends whose light continues to shine, even in the darkest of stories. Thank you for listening.